She was shopping for a phone. He pulled a gun on her. But when she pulled out her badge, everything changed. Turns out, she's an FBI agent, and now he's under federal investigation. Welcome to Moral Mirror, where true stories reveal deeper truths. That was just another warm Saturday afternoon at Eastwood Mall in suburban Georgia. Families strolled past window displays. Kids raced toward the arcade, and the scent of buttery pretzels filled the air. Shoppers moved about freely, hunting for deals, sipping iced coffees, unaware that in mere minutes, this seemingly peaceful setting would become the center of national attention. In the middle of this ordinary crowd walked Maya Jennings, 33 years old, dressed casually in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie. Nothing about her stood out, except perhaps her calm presence and focused steps. She wasn't just another shopper. She was a woman on a quick errand. She had planned to stop by the Apple store, maybe grab lunch, and be back home before sunset. But fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to Maya, Officer Kyle Mercer, a 7-year veteran of the Eastwood Police Department, had been patrolling the mall's interior after a vague call came in about a potential shoplifting suspect. The dispatcher reportedly shared a general description: black female, early 30s, dark hoodie, seen near electronics. No mention of a crime, no specific store, no confirmed suspect. Officer Mercer, who had a history of aggressive stops, though never formally reprimanded, scanned the crowds until his eyes landed on Maya. Without confirmation, without a second opinion, without pause, he began to follow her. Maya noticed almost instantly. A trained federal agent with years in field operations, her instincts were sharper than most. She clocked his footsteps, measured his distance, and recognized the shift in energy. At first, she gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe mall security had asked for backup. Maybe he was responding to another call. But that hope quickly faded when she heard the command. "Hey, stop right there." Startled but calm, Maya turned to face him. She kept her hands visible, her posture non-threatening. She responded with the clarity and calm of someone who'd faced more dangerous moments than this. "I'm a federal agent," she said. "I have my badge in my jacket. May I reach for it?" But Mercer didn't listen. Instead, he drew his firearm. He aimed it squarely at her chest, in a public place, in front of dozens of witnesses, including children. The crowd froze. Several people gasped. Some pulled out phones. Others shouted, "What are you doing?" She didn't do anything. But Mercer kept shouting, "Hand where I can see them. Get on the ground." What followed was a tense 90 seconds that felt like an hour. Maya, holding her ground, repeated herself again. "I'm a special agent with the FBI. I'm not armed. My badge is in my left pocket. Please let me reach for it." Mercer yelled louder, "Get on the ground. Do not move, or I will shoot." Several bystanders stepped in, putting themselves between Maya and the line of fire. A mall security officer arrived, hands raised, attempting to defuse the situation. "She's saying she's law enforcement," the guard said. "Let's verify before this escalates." Even then, Mercer hesitated. Finally, with both hands in view, Maya slowly reached into her pocket, pulled out her leather credentials wallet, and flipped it open. There it was, clear as day, the gold badge and identification card of a federal agent. Special Agent Maya Jennings, FBI, Civil Rights Division. For a moment, there was silence. Mercer froze. The barrel of his gun lowered, but only slightly. His face turned pale, his posture stiffened, and his hand trembled. He had just pulled a weapon on a federal agent. Maya stayed calm. Mercer muttered something. An apology? A cover? Witnesses later disagreed. Some said he claimed she matched a suspect. Others heard him say it was a misunderstanding. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Phones had captured everything. The commands, the panic, the weapon, and most importantly, the badge. Maya looked him in the eye and said, simply, "You're going to hear from me again." She walked away, escorted by mall security to a back office, where she made her first call, not to a lawyer, but to her supervisor at the bureau. Within 30 minutes, the wheels were in motion. When a police officer aims a gun at a federal agent, the system isn't just embarrassed, it's exposed. What happened next? A chain reaction of accountability, silence, and unexpected resistance. and Maya Jennings wasn't going to let it slide. The moment Maya Jennings left the mall security office, her phone was already buzzing. The incident had exploded online. Videos taken by bystanders had spread like wildfire, racking up views by the minute. One particularly sharp clip, just 42 seconds long, showed a visibly calm black woman, hands raised, being screamed at by a white officer with his gun drawn. The caption read, "Cop pulls gun on black woman in mall. She's FBI flushed face #Justice for Maya." It had gone viral. Within hours, Maya's name was trending on multiple platforms. Her identity wasn't officially released, but anyone who had been there that day was talking, and online detectives did the rest. By the time she arrived home, she had already been in contact with her FBI supervisor, 2 legal advisors, and the local field office. The Bureau was moving quickly. An internal incident report was opened before midnight. But this was no routine paperwork. What happened that afternoon wasn't just a confrontation. It was a federal mess. What made the situation even more unique was that Maya wasn't just a random agent. She worked in the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Her job? Investigating misconduct and abuse by law enforcement. And now, the very kind of case she'd reviewed dozens of times before had happened to her, in broad daylight. But this time, it wasn't a file. It was personal, and the Bureau didn't waste time. Maya was pulled from her current caseload and reassigned. But not to a desk. She was placed as a supporting analyst in the very task force now investigating the incident. Some within the agency questioned whether she should be involved directly. They wondered if it was too close, too emotionally charged. But her superiors thought otherwise. No one understood the weight of the moment better than Maya. She knew the law, she knew the protocol, and more importantly, she knew what to look for. She had been living it for years. The question wasn't whether she was too close. The question was, who else could see it more clearly? Meanwhile, the Eastwood Police Department tried to contain the storm. On Monday morning, just 2 days after the incident, they released a statement that only made things worse. "We are aware of a situation involving one of our officers and an individual at Eastwood Mall on Saturday afternoon. The matter is under internal review, and we are cooperating fully with the FBI." No mention of Maya's identity. No acknowledgement that she was law enforcement. And certainly no apology. The internet noticed. Comment sections erupted with disbelief. People demanded transparency. Say her name. She's not an individual. She's an FBI agent. Others were harsher. You pointed a gun at Justice. Now, Justice is pointing back. As the pressure mounted, local news stations caught on. What began as a TikTok video had now become headline news. By Monday evening, CNN, MSNBC, and even international outlets were reporting the story. The facts were too sharp to ignore. A black woman, wrongly targeted, gun drawn, and she turns out to be a federal agent. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. But behind the scenes, Maya was preparing more than just statements. She was working with federal attorneys to file a formal civil rights complaint, not just against Officer Mercer, but against the Eastwood Police Department for their handling of the situation, their lack of protocol, and the absence of accountability. Protests erupted that night, peaceful but powerful. Dozens gathered outside Eastwood PD headquarters with signs reading, "A badge didn't protect her. What about us?" And he pointed a gun at the law. Maya didn't attend. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't just a victim. She was an active part of the investigation. She was moving quietly but powerfully. The case built quickly. Witnesses were interviewed. Multiple angles of video were submitted to the FBI. One clip, filmed by a father holding his child, showed Maya standing still, both hands up, clearly saying she was an FBI agent before Officer Mercer even gave his first command. It wasn't just excessive force. It was preemptive aggression without cause. Then came the body cam footage. Under public pressure, Eastwood PD reluctantly released Officer Mercer's recording. It didn't help him. In fact, it confirmed what everyone feared. Before he even approached Maya, Mercer radioed in. "Black female, dark hoodie, looks suspicious. Gonna check her out." No mention of a crime. No description that matched a real suspect. Just suspicion based on appearance. Federal guidelines are clear. Weapons should only be drawn when there is a direct, immediate threat to life or safety. Maya posed no threat. She was calm, cooperative, identified herself professionally and clearly. And yet, she was treated like a suspect, treated like a threat, treated as guilty. The legal implications were massive. Maya's legal team now had evidence of racial profiling, false detainment, and an unlawful threat of deadly force. All committed in public, all caught on camera. The irony was undeniable. The officer who pulled a gun to feel powerful had pointed it at the very system designed to hold him accountable. And now, that system had taken notice. Maya wasn't fighting this just for herself. She'd seen these stories too many times, files that came across her desk with names, wounds, and silence. But this time, the silence had broken. The cameras had caught it, and she had lived it. When you aim a weapon at justice, expect justice to aim back. This wasn't just about one woman at the mall. This was about every person ever stopped for looking like someone or not. And this time, the law fought back. By midweek, the pressure on the Eastwood Police Department was no longer just public. It had become political. Calls from civil rights organizations, legal watchdogs, and even sitting members of Congress were pouring into city offices demanding answers. What had started as a localized confrontation had now turned into a full-blown national controversy. Officer Kyle Mercer, once considered a loyal if aggressive cop with years of service, had now become the face of unchecked policing. And inside the department, tensions were growing. The Eastwood Police Union issued a statement defending Mercer, claiming he had acted within protocol based on the information available at the time. They insisted he believed Maya Jennings could have been armed and potentially dangerous. But as more footage and facts came to light, that defense began to crumble. The union's backing sparked outrage from both the public and within their own ranks. Several officers reportedly expressed concern privately, stating that Mercer's behavior didn't reflect department values and that he had jumped the gun, literally. Behind closed doors, Maya and the FBI's internal review team were dissecting every detail. They examined radio logs, training records, and Mercer's personnel file. What they found painted a troubling picture. Mercer had been involved in 3 prior use-of-force complaints over the past 4 years, none of which resulted in disciplinary action. One involved a teenager he had pinned to the ground during a mistaken identity stop. Another involved an elderly man he had handcuffed at a gas station over what turned out to be a parking dispute. In every case, Mercer claimed he had followed department protocol. But now, with the national spotlight burning brightly, those excuses no longer felt sufficient. Meanwhile, Maya remained mostly silent in public, but her presence was felt everywhere. The footage of her calm, controlled demeanor during the confrontation had struck a chord with millions. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't escalated. She had done everything right. And yet, a gun had still been pulled on her. That fact resonated deeply. People began sharing their own stories under the hashtag #ICouldBeMaya. From college students to professionals, Black Americans across the country told stories of being followed, questioned, doubted, or threatened simply because they looked like someone who fit the description. Maya's experience had tapped into something collective, something painful and long ignored. City leaders couldn't ignore it any longer. A town hall meeting was hastily organized with local officials, police representatives, and members of the FBI all invited to attend. Maya was there, not as a victim, but as a representative of the justice system. When she finally spoke, her words were precise and unshaken. She didn't call for Officer Mercer to be fired. She didn't ask for public sympathy. What she asked for was systemic accountability. She reminded the audience that while her badge had eventually protected her, countless others never had that chance. Her story, she said, shouldn't be rare only because of her job title. It should be rare because such things should never happen in the first place. The room fell silent. Her speech was clipped and shared online, adding fuel to a conversation that was no longer about one officer or one incident, but about a structure that allowed profiling and fear to drive actions rather than facts. Her credibility was undeniable. She wasn't an outsider demanding change. She was part of the system itself, demanding it from within. Still, not everyone was ready to accept that change. Some members of the Eastwood City Council pushed back, accusing Maya and the FBI of politicizing the issue. Others claimed the officer had been set up by media pressure. These voices, though loud, were quickly drowned by the growing calls for transparency and reform. The state's attorney general announced a parallel inquiry. The Department of Justice added civil rights observers to monitor the case. Federal attention wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was operational. Officer Mercer was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of both the internal and federal investigations. The police union threatened a walkout, but few officers joined them. It was becoming clear that protecting Mercer at the cost of public trust was a line many weren't willing to cross. Maya continued her role behind the scenes, pouring through case files and incident reports, ensuring no step in the process was skipped or buried. She refused interviews, declined book offers, and ignored the sudden spotlight chasing her name. She didn't want fame. She wanted something more lasting, something harder to earn. Change. As the investigation deepened, more troubling signs appeared. Body cam footage from previous complaints against Mercer had mysteriously been lost or mislabeled. Witnesses from past incidents claimed they were never properly contacted. The FBI now suspected a pattern of institutional shielding, a quiet but dangerous culture of protecting problematic officers instead of addressing their behavior. For Maya, that wasn't just negligence. It was complicity. What had begun as a single moment of injustice at a mall was revealing layer after layer of something far more widespread. Maya was not just navigating a personal experience. She was standing at the epicenter of a cultural reckoning. And she wasn't stepping back. By the end of the second week, what had started as a moment of wrongful aggression in a mall had become something much larger. An investigation not only into a single officer's actions, but into the systems that protected him. As Maya Jennings continued her work within the FBI's internal task force, the case grew from an isolated civil rights review into a full-scale federal inquiry into the Eastwood Police Department's misconduct record. There were suddenly more names on the table. Other officers, other complaints, old cases that had been quietly dismissed without follow-up. A troubling pattern was emerging, and Maya was at the center of it all. The national conversation had shifted. News panels no longer asked what happened to Maya. That part was clear. Now they asked, how often does this happen to people who can't defend themselves? The story hit differently because Maya had the training, the authority, and the badge, and still, it nearly wasn't enough. That fact haunted people, and it brought others to speak out. Former Eastwood residents began sharing their stories. One man, a schoolteacher, recalled being slammed against his car 5 years earlier during a traffic stop. The officer had been Mercer. Another woman came forward about being held at gunpoint while jogging. Again, Mercer. The pieces were falling into place. Public pressure reached a new level. Activists and clergy members held a vigil outside the police department, lighting candles in a circle with signs that read, "Maya survived." Many don't. Students at a nearby university staged a walkout. Local businesses began pulling funding from the police union. The story wasn't going away. It was growing, gathering momentum from all sides. Maya still didn't speak publicly, but her presence loomed large. She was working late nights, poring over internal documents and reviewing complaint logs. She was methodical, driven, and unshakably focused. Inside the Eastwood Police Department, the atmosphere had changed. Officers who had once defended Mercer now distanced themselves. His locker was emptied without fanfare. Supervisors kept to their offices, unsure whether they would be next to fall under scrutiny. The department's leadership issued a statement saying they were cooperating fully with federal authorities, but insiders knew the truth. Fear had replaced arrogance. And Maya's name was on every whiteboard, every planning document, every late-night meeting. She had become the symbol of accountability they hadn't prepared for. At the state level, elected officials began weighing in. The governor released a statement supporting the federal review, calling for transparency and promising reform. But the real battle was happening behind the scenes. Lobbyists for law enforcement unions pushed back hard. They warned lawmakers against setting a precedent that would undermine officer confidence in the field. They wanted the case buried quietly, wrapped in red tape, dismissed as a misunderstanding. But that strategy was failing. The evidence was too strong. The videos were too clear. And Maya was too credible to discredit. When the FBI's interim report was delivered to the Department of Justice, it laid out a timeline that was damning. Officer Mercer had acted without probable cause. His use of force was unjustified. His prior conduct had been improperly documented. And most importantly, the department had failed to take corrective action even when warning signs were obvious. The report stopped short of labeling it systemic corruption, but it didn't need to. The implication was loud enough. For Maya, every page of that report was another weight pressing on her conscience. She had reviewed hundreds of cases like this in her career, but reading her own name in the incident summaries, seeing herself in the footage, this wasn't just work anymore. It was a fight she never chose, but was now fully committed to. And it was taking a toll. She hadn't slept well in weeks. She avoided cameras, skipped interviews, turned down appearances. She knew the media wanted her face, but she wasn't interested in being a headline. She wanted outcomes. Then, 3 weeks after the incident, Maya received a call that shifted the tone of everything. A former officer from Eastwood PD, a woman who had quietly resigned 2 years earlier, reached out anonymously, saying she had files. Internal communications, misfiled complaints, emails showing how Mercer's actions had been deliberately shielded by his supervisors who didn't want the department to look bad. If the information was real, it would confirm the worst suspicions. Eastwood PD hadn't just failed to act, they had actively covered for Mercer. Maya took the meeting in a secure bureau location. The former officer brought a flash drive and a hard copy binder, both containing material that had been copied before her resignation. It included internal memos, falsified training reports, and even notes indicating pressure from senior leadership to close cases quietly when officers were involved. Maya reviewed each page in silence. It was all there, proof not just of negligence, but of an organized effort to protect reputations over people. This was the break the case needed. With the new documents in hand, Maya and the federal team prepared for the next phase. Formal recommendations for disciplinary action, a public briefing, and the possibility of federal oversight for the Eastwood Police Department. But Maya also knew this wouldn't be the end. Accountability was only one part of the story. What mattered more was whether the department, and the system behind it, was willing to change once the cameras left. As she walked out of the bureau that night, documents in hand, she looked calm, focused, unyielding. She wasn't walking away from the fire. She was walking straight into it, knowing exactly how to hold it accountable. For weeks after the confrontation that changed everything, the findings of the FBI's investigation were made public. A press conference was held outside the federal building downtown. Reporters lined up early. Cameras flashed. Microphones buzzed. And though Maya Jennings was not the one standing behind the podium, her name was on every page of the report. She sat in the front row, quiet and composed, watching as the Bureau's spokesperson summarized the conclusions she had helped write. The report was direct, damning, and comprehensive. Officer Kyle Mercer's actions were declared unjustified, excessive, and in violation of constitutional rights. It detailed how he had acted based on racial bias, failed to follow de-escalation protocol, and ignored clear identification from a federal agent. But the most serious revelation came toward the end. Multiple supervisors within the Eastwood Police Department had knowingly withheld prior complaints against Mercer and altered internal reports to minimize his disciplinary record. This wasn't just bad policing. It was institutional cover-up. The Justice Department announced that it would begin steps toward federal oversight of the Eastwood PD. The department would be required to accept a consent decree, a binding legal agreement enforcing reforms, training updates, and independent monitoring. It would take years, but it was a start, and it was largely because Maya had refused to let the moment pass unnoticed. Officer Mercer resigned the next day. There was no farewell ceremony, no public defense. His silence, after weeks of tension, spoke louder than any press release. The union offered no further statements. For once, there was no shield strong enough to protect misconduct from accountability. The city's mayor held a separate press briefing, acknowledging systemic failures and promising community involvement in the department's rebuilding. Words, Maya knew, were only part of the solution. She'd heard promises before. What mattered now was whether change would survive without cameras, hashtags, and national headlines. Would Eastwood remember this when the story faded? Would departments across the country learn anything from it? Maya returned to her duties in the bureau, but things weren't the same. Her work now came with an edge sharpened by personal experience. She still read case files late into the night, but she now read between the lines more than ever. She looked deeper into patterns: who was being stopped, who was being silenced, and who was being protected. She was no longer just an investigator. She was a survivor of the system she had sworn to uphold, and that made her more dangerous to injustice than ever before. She received offers from news outlets, book publishers, even political parties asking if she would consider running for office. She declined them all. This wasn't about fame. This was about doing the work, quietly, relentlessly, the same way she had always done it. 1 month after the incident, Maya finally spoke publicly. She attended a town hall hosted by a local civil rights group. She didn't stand behind a podium. She sat on a folding chair in the middle of the room, surrounded by residents who had lived their own versions of her story. She listened to their pain, their frustration, and their hope. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't talk about the moment Mercer pulled the gun. She talked about what happened afterward. The process, the resistance, the buried truths, and the courage it took to keep pushing when others wanted her to walk away. She ended her remarks with a single sentence that stayed with every person in the room. Justice isn't a feeling, it's a process. And it only works if we never stop showing up. Outside, the crowd applauded not just her words, but her presence. She had shown up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed, profiled, or targeted simply because they looked like someone who fit a vague description. Her badge had been her shield that day, but her voice had become her sword, and she had used it to cut through a system that too often hides behind silence. As the cameras packed up and the final stories aired, life in Eastwood began moving forward. But it did so with new awareness. A mural appeared downtown, painted by local artists, showing Maya with her hands raised, not in fear, but in strength. The caption read, "Seen, heard, remembered." And that's what this story is about. Not just what happened at the mall, but what it revealed about who we are, what asked of us, and how one woman's calm resistance reminded an entire country that real power doesn't come from a weapon. It comes from truth and the courage to demand more. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in justice, accountability, and the power of ordinary moments to spark real change, then help us keep telling them. Subscribe to Moral Mirror for more true stories that expose, enlighten, and empower. Your voice matters. Let's keep reflecting what's real.